Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Guy with the Boxeo, a channel about a simple, everyday person that talks about his love of boxing and shares his own knowledge of the sport with anyone that is willing to listen. So, without further ado, let's begin. The subject matter is of no surprise. You saw it on the YouTube image there. What's next for the two-time undisputed heavyweight champion, Oleksandr Oleksandrovich Usyk? It's no surprise now. It's old news that July 19th, earlier this year, he beat Daniel Dubois for a second time via fifth round knockout with that beautiful left hook that put to sleep not only Dubois, but also any kind of debate to have a third fight in this trilogy. So there you go. He is the first two-time undisputed heavyweight champion in this four-belt era, regaining the IBF belt that he never really lost. So then comes the big question, what is next for Usyk? And I'm going to give you four possible routes for Usyk and why these things could happen. The first one is the one that's been talked about quite a bit, is a potential trilogy fight with Tyson Fury. There's been talk with Fury and the Saudis that there's potential for a third fight between Fury and Usyk to happen in 2026 in London, once again in Wembley Stadium. The possibility of this fight happening kind of shows what state the division is right now, because for a lot of people, most people are shaking their heads at this fight. A trilogy usually happens in combat sports when either each side has one win apiece, or the wins are contentious. For example, Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez. They went to 4 fights because you could have argued for at least two of those fights that Marquez could have been labeled a victor. In this potential series, it's quite decisive that Usyk won both the first and the second fight. And that is where the luster for this fight is not as great as it used to be. But this is where it can get frustrating, because right now in the current state of things, that is possibly the biggest money generating fight for Usyk in terms of boxing, given that Fury, despite losing twice to Usyk, still has market value to his name. Personally, I think Fury should fight Joshua and figure out that fight. But that is a fight that is potentially going to happen again. And even though we've recently heard Fury debate that he will never come back again, in boxing, prize fighting, it's all about money. That's as simple as that. If the price is right, people will fight. And we've heard this before, where retirements are written in wet sand. We just saw Manny Pacquiao come back and fight Mario Barrios. We've seen, let's see another example here. David Haye in the 2010s was saying he was going to retire at 31. Did so, but only for a moment. He fought Derek Chisora and then fought a few years later against guys like Mark Demori, Tony Bellew, etc. So if the price is right, people will fight. And if the benefactors, I guess in this case the Saudis, make that fight happen, it will be because they put out a lot of money for it. But personally, I don't want to see that fight. I think the first 2 fights prove that Usyk is the better fighter of the two. But it is a chance that fight will show up in reality. The second alternative is probably the one that seems to be the most popular choice for boxing fans. It is a bout with Joseph Parker. Parker has been quite on a tear since losing to Anthony Joshua in 2018 and then getting stopped by Joy Joyce in 2022. He has rejuvenated himself and aged quite well, having wins with over Deontay Wilder, Gilles Zhang, and Marcin Bakole. And is he deserving of a title fight? Yes, he is. He's definitely won over fans with the consistent wins, his toughness, his footwork, hand speed, and and also his ability to adapt in the middle of fights, as you could see with the Gilles Jean fight, where people thought he was about to get finished, and adapted himself quite well to take Zhang into deeper waters and come out with a victory. Not to mention on top of a granite chin. So while I think he's definitely deserving of this fight, the challenge here, I think, is the stylistic aspect. I think Parker is a fantastic boxer, but I'm not sure how he would hold up with his approach against a master mover like Usyk, because that would be the big question. On the best days of both fighters, I do feel that Usyk would have the technique and stamina to flummox Parker into a decision or late TKO, because the movement stuff part is the part that I have the question mark about Parker. Because if you see a lot of the last few guys he fought, Wilder, Zhang, and Bakoli, they were more stationary opponents, which worked to Parker's strengths. Because if you do stand in front of a guy like Parker, this is where he shines. So that would be the biggest challenge, and this is why, for this reason, it's not the most exciting fight for me personally. But I do propose something that would make this fight interesting. There's a country called New Zealand, where Joseph Parker's from. And in New Zealand, there's a lovely little stadium in Auckland called Eden Park. It seats about 50,000 people. Having Parker versus Usyk in New Zealand, in Eden Park, I think would make things a lot more interesting. Because now you have the chance to potentially break record and make history in terms of boxing in the country of New Zealand. But also it gives that intrigue of Parker being in his home field, his homeland. And that stadium will sell out for this fight. An undisputed heavyweight championship fight in a stadium in New Zealand will definitely sell out. And it makes that intrigue. And then also seeing how Usyk historically has no problem traveling for the right fight and money, as he's been all over the place in Europe and United States. I think that would make that fight a lot more interesting for me personally. So I'm not completely writing off that fight. It's not my personal favorite choice here, but there is potential there, and I think a fight in New Zealand would make it very exciting. The third option is a bout with the current WBC interim heavyweight champion from Germany, Ajit Kabayel. He's been nicknamed the Liver King, not to be confused with the guy that's having the quarrel with Joe Rogan here, but it's because of that relentless pressure, that continuous body attack that has won him quite a few impressive victories over Arslanbek Makhmudov, Frank Sanchez, and Gilles Jean. And that's the one that I feel is the most interesting bout for Usyk stylistically, because it brings me back to the bout he had with Chisora in England during the pandemic. Because if you recall that fight, Chisora, despite being past his prime, gave Usyk trouble in the first few rounds with the relentless pressure. Because that's usually the case when you have a mover versus a pressure fighter. The big question is who's going to be able to maintain their style and for how long. In this case, it would be 12 rounds. And 12 rounds is a long time. 12 rounds is a long time to keep somebody off you, and also 12 rounds is a long time can be a long time to have somebody away from you for the whole time. So that's the big question, because we saw that with Chisora, Usyk can definitely be pressured, and while he did adapt very well in that fight, Kabayel is younger, is sharper, and also probably more resilient, as we just saw with his bout with Gilles Jean, taking Zhang's best punch and coming back to stopping him. So I think this would be possibly the most intriguing fight. And as well, Usyk is getting up there in age now, coming, I believe, is he 30, 38 now, 37, 38. So one wonders now if age will start playing a factor, especially with especially with a style like Usyk. Yes, he is God given in terms of ability and talent, but ask anyone that uses moving in their style in boxing, and they'll tell you it gets harder as you get older. So the all these factors make to me make that fight between Oleksandr Usyk and Ajit Kabayel the most intriguing fight for Usyk at this point. The main problem, though, is the lack of publicity that may come across this fight. Because compared to the other two options, Tyson Fury, Joseph Parker, Kabayel is less known, especially to the English speaking world. And that can prove to be a detriment in terms of making this bout bigger than, or as big as it could be and should be. And I think because again I don't watch German TV, so I'm not too familiar with how Kabayel presents himself there, but he comes off as rather a more quiet person and is focused on his work, which while admirable, publicity is very important in selling tickets, as we're seeing why Tyson Fury's even thought about after two losses to Usyk. So that could prove to be a challenge, and the meaning that this fight may not impress people outside of the hardcore demographic like myself. So, but to me, it is the most intriguing fight stylistically, and I would like to personally see that fight if Usyk fights again. The fourth and final choice is retirement. There isn't a lot to do anymore with Usyk. He's thoroughly established himself as the person in the heavyweight division, the top person, having beaten Tyson Fury twice, Anthony Joshua twice, Daniel Dubois twice, and it's at a point where if he were to retire tomorrow, most people wouldn't knock him, because we often see like when fighters retire, they should have fought someone else, like when Andre Ward retired, why did he not fight Dmitry Bivol or Artur Beterbiev? Or if Canelo were retired tomorrow, why didn't he fight David Benavidez? So there's always like almost always there's a critique about like why didn't you fight somebody when you retired? And with Usyk, I feel that the critique would not be as great as other examples that I've just used. So, and at this point, like it's all money. It's all about money for Usyk, because what is there to prove in terms of achieving goals here? Because two-time heavyweight champion of the world, Olympic gold medalist, undefeated record. Like what else is there to do? And so, if he were to retire, it would not shock me at this point, and he would probably leave with little to no criticism at this moment in time, because also the heavyweight division is, I believe, come somewhat in a rebuilding phase. We're seeing, we were told in the 2010s that this would be the era of the British boxers, and it was to a point. And then Usyk came in and shook the whole apple cart, because prior to him coming in, we were all thinking of Joshua versus Fury as the preeminent fight in the heavyweight division. So retirement seems to be an imminent thing. Of course, the question is when, and if it were tomorrow, it wouldn't surprise me either. So that concludes my assessment of what's next for Oleksandr Usyk. 4 options, either against Fury, Joseph Parker, or Ajit Kabayel, or retirement. If you have any thoughts or questions or feedback, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to comment below, like the video, and show your support and subscribe. Wishing you guys all the best, and hope you enjoy the fights to come in the rest of the year.